last week, we sort of started a series that we're calling By a Thread. And the whole premise of that is I think if we were to look around us, most of the time, most of the people that we come in contact with in our lives, including many times ourselves, we would look at our lives, we would look at other people around us, and we go, they are barely hanging on. We are barely hanging on by a thread. And it might be with our finances, it might be with peace, it might be family, it might be relationships, whatever it may be. We can look around and go, if one little thing happens, this little tiny thread, this little sliver of thread that is holding me up, is holding things together, I'm done if anything happens. I'm one step away. I'm one wrong move away. I'm one person saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing away from being in complete ruin. And we've said that we are pretty certain that Jesus doesn't want us to live that way. In fact, we started to look at this scripture in Romans chapter 8 that said, not only do we not just live by a thread barely hanging on, as believers, we are to be a people that are not just holding ground, but we are to be a people that are taking ground. And then that goes in every single area of our life, and that we are to live like more than a conqueror. And that's not dependent upon our circumstances, that is dependent upon our reliance on Jesus Christ. And so I want you to take a moment with me, and I want you to imagine, I want you to pretend, and we're going to kind of go through some decades. And I just want you to imagine that you are going to go and you are going to greet some people through the decades. And so let's start off maybe in the 1920s, all right? In the 1920s, the roaring 20s, things are going pretty good. And so somebody comes and says, "Hey, Danny, how are you?" And his response is probably, "I'm swell. I'm dandy," right? That's exactly what you would say, right, Danny? It's just like that in the 1920s. And if you would fast forward, go a little bit further, go to the 1940s, times are a little bit rougher, and you ask somebody, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they might respond, "Getting by." Or they might respond one day at a time. It's just kind of making it one day at a time. That's their response. Then we fast forward a little bit further and we go to the 60s and the 70s. You go, "Hey man, how are you doing?" And they just respond, "Groovy." Like I'm not. If they even remembered you saying anything to them because of all of the stuff that they were on, they might say that. But some of you lived through the 60s and 70s and you turned out okay. All right. So you might say that. And then in the 90s, all right, everybody now like the 90s are a long time ago. Not really, but they would say the 90s or the early 2000s. Somebody might say, "Hey, how's it going?" And maybe you would answer, "Living the dream. Living the dream, bruh. Just doing it. Just doing it. Just doing it, man. You know. Like, or they might say it with like a little bit of angst. "I'm good. I'm okay." All right, that's the 90s, early 2000s. But now, if somebody was to ask you, "How's it going?" probably the majority of the responses back, and my response back to so many people would be, "Hey, how's it going?" And I would say, "Busy. Busy." Like it's not, "I'm good," it's not swell, it's not any of those things, it's just busy. It's not a reflection of any kind of emotion or feeling at all. It's just, "Hey, look at my calendar. Look, I'm busy." If you're a Christian, maybe the churchy response is, "I'm just going through a busy season right now." If you put season in it, like Jesus must have said it. All right. So what does this say about us? And sure, it's a reflection kind of on our fast-paced culture a little bit, our productivity-focused lifestyle, but we also believe that being busy means that we're in demand, that we're productive, and that maybe even that we are important. See, our busyness is not a statement of, "Oh, I'm too busy," but sometimes it's kind of that humble brag that states that I'm important enough that people want me to do things for them and to be around them and to always do. That's what it says. See, the boundary between work life and home life is pretty much gone. Most of our inboxes are pretty full. Some of you, I've sent you emails before, and I know sometimes I just might not get back to you, but some of you, I've sent emails to you before, and you know what it says? I'm sorry, mailbox is full. Like, you have so much mail that even Google says no more. You're done. Like, you have reached your limit. And I don't even know what that limit is, because sometimes I look at my wife and her phone, and it'll have like this number in front of emails, and it's like 1,000, and I'm going, I don't know how you live that way. Like, it's scary. All right? Our thoughts are consumed with unfinished tasks. Our calendars are cluttered with reminders. Like, even with exercise. Like, way back when in PE class, like, you'd go and the coach would tell you, go run. And that was PE class. You ran. Or you might play a game. And now it's like, oh, it's PE class. And then you're going to, when you grow up and you're out of PE class, now you go to do all this fitness stuff. And not only are you doing the fitness stuff, but you've got a watch that tracks exactly how many steps you take while you're exercising. Exactly how many beats per minute is your heart getting. Like, we track everything. There's all of this information constantly coming at us. Got to close those rings. Or our jobs. It's like, you can't have a job. You got to have a job, and you got a side hustle. You got to have the side hustle. If you don't have the side hustle, then you're not hustling. You're not working. You're lazy. You're not busy enough. Whatever we have, we need to hustle more so we can get more, because what we have is not enough. 6 work days isn't enough. 7's not enough. We really need 8 to be able to get all the things done that we need to get done. Oh, and by the way, some of you, like me, you've got kids. Or you might have grandkids. And so then you throw that into the mix and go, I'll get to you next Tuesday. Maybe. You've got to figure out how to do this. We can't even stop to eat. I laugh because I do this. I'm like, I can't even go through just a drive-through. It's got to be the fast drive-through. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to throw this out there. I am not going to the little the shake, the burger place. I'm not going to say it. You know what I'm talking about? The one over here. Yeah, the new one, the nice one's got great burgers, great shakes, all that kind of stuff. It's good. And we're like one of the only ones in all of America that have a drive-through. There's a reason. Like, they're so slow, and I don't have time for this drive-through. I need a faster drive-through. Like, we just don't have time. We've got so much going on. And I don't know if you've kind of realized this, but even our screen time is just skyrocketing. Like, as of the 2020s, the average adult, this is not your kids, this is not your grandkids, this is the average adult on a screen, laptop, phone, or TV is around 7 hours a day. 7 hours a day. We are busy. I don't know if we're doing anything. I don't know if we're living life, but we are busy. And so over the next few weeks, as we start to kind of put some practical things in our life to go, life is not supposed to look like this. Jesus hasn't called us to live like this. I don't think that I can actually be kingdom-minded if I continue to live like this. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 2 and 3 over the next few weeks, and in the garden called Eden, or some people might even say the garden of abundance. And that's what we're going to look like, because we want to be a people that live out of abundance, because that's the kind of God that we have. And that's exactly where God formed us to flourish in our mental health and our physical health, that we'd have all the material goods that we needed, that our relationships would be perfect and would be great. And so some of us, I think what we do is we want to look like this healthy, nice, wonderful tree, that our life is full of fruit and full of goodness, and we want to look like a tree kind of like the one we're going to put on the screen here. Well, not that one. We want to look like that's the one. Whew. We want to look like that. Like, I don't even have to pick those apples. They're going to fall in my hand. right? You've been to some orchards like that. My family, around October, November every year, we love to go back and visit family in Philly, and we go to the orchard there and pick all the apples, and my kids have like just shoving their face full of apples, and they never make it in the bag, and so I'm sorry that they're cheating somebody out of 25 cents. But we go, and they're just, I mean, they're all over, and there's so many of them. They're falling on the ground. That there's so many, and I think that's the kind of fruitful life that we want to have. That's the kind of fruitful life that Jesus is calling us to, and yet most of us, we'll put on the other one now. Most of us feel like that. Like, if I've got anything, the worms of my workplace, the worms of my children, the worms of the finances, the worms of everything have kind of taken all of the little bit of fruit that I was able to kind of get out there, and they've destroyed it. And it's gone. But that's not the life that we want to have. That's not the life that we're looking for. But when we continue to live like we're living, that's the kind of life that we're going to continue it. So how many of you have felt like that before? The rest of you will have a truth-telling session next week for you, because I know at some point in your life you have. It may not have been today, may not have been this week, but you have. And we wonder, why are we so tired? Why are we so busy? What happened? And I just kind of ask the question, go back to the other fruit. When was the last time that you felt like that? When was the last time that, and when I say feel, I don't just mean emotionally. I mean, you really understand and comprehend with mentally and emotionally, all of that, that you really feel like this was the kind of life that I'm living. And some of you may go never, and some of you go like, I can remember a time. But see, that's the way that God wanted us and created us to live. See, we started off in the presence of God, but now the demands of work and the distractions of life keep us from the rest that He offers. So how can we get back spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically to that? So if you've got your Bible, I want you to go to Genesis chapter 2. If not, there's a QR code in front of you. It'll link to kind of the message notes that we have in the Bible app that you can use. But I encourage you that you would read, take some notes today, whatever God speaks to you, that you would write it down so that you walk out of here, that you live different, not just hear a message and go, oh, that felt good for a moment. Like, we're supposed to be changed by God's word. But this is in Genesis chapter 2, and we're going to start in verse 2 and 3. And it says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work that He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. Now, before we go a little bit further into that, you talk about a God that is creating and a God that is resting. Let me ask you a question. How big is your view of God? Like, how big do you think He is? Have you thought about how big He is? See, later on in Genesis, in chapter 15, God told Abraham to look up and to count the stars, if you can indeed count them. And He's created all of that. To kind of give that a little perspective, all right, NASA launched the James Webb Telescope, and we kind of have a view into the bigness of God a little bit. Astronomers believe that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. We still can't even count how many galaxies there are, and in those galaxies, there's stars, all of this stuff. To kind of put that into perspective, because a trillion is kind of a hard to get to number, I want you to think of a trillion in seconds. Think of it in seconds. So 1 million seconds is 11 and a half days. All right, that's not that big. All right, 11 and a half days. Or kind of next Thursday. 1 billion seconds is about 32 years. That puts us into about 2060. Maybe by then Orlando City would have won a title by then. I don't know. We'll see. Or the Magic. Listen to this, though. This is when it gets crazy. 1 trillion seconds is nearly 31,700 years. There are at least 2 trillion galaxies, each filled with stars and planets. There are more stars than grains of sand on every beach on earth. God's big. God is big. So that's the telescope. Let's look at the microscope. Make it a little bit more personal. There's almost 8 billion people on this earth, which is crazy because like when I was growing up, it was like, 3 billion, and that seemed like a ton, and now it's already up to 8 billion on this earth. And each human with a brain contains 86 billion neurons, making trillions of synapses every day. And all of that brain activity is sending 300 billion emails every day. No wonder we're busy. But God is the creator and upholder of the entire massive universe with trillions of stars and brain synapses every day. And this incredible God who is overseeing all of our cosmos rested. He rested. Today, our culture says that what you produce is what matters. And we have come to believe that we don't have time to slow down. But our God, the God of galaxies, modeled for us a perfect week. See, what we produce, it kind of does matter a little bit. But what we've said is that that's the only thing that matters. Even in raising kids, so many times we look at our kids and we think there's something to produce instead of children to love and to steward. And when we look at everything in life as something to produce, it is going to be overwhelming for us in a major, major way. But God gave us and modeled for us a perfect week. Work 6 days, rest 1. Rest 6 days, or work 6 days, rest 1 day. And I love this quote that says, God rested not just because creation was done, but that creation was complete in the sense that it was whole. Because in one sense, creation is still creating. It's still going on. It's adjusting. It's still changing. But God rested. And so we learn about those 7 days of creation, one of which was fully at rest. And then Moses kind of gives us a little bit more detail of the 6th day. And so chapter 1 of Genesis gives us, here's the 6 days, here's everything that happened. And then in chapter 2, he goes on to go, okay, now I'm going to give you a very concise description of exactly what happened on that 6th day. And in verse 5 of chapter 2, it says, Now no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. See, God formed man, and his purpose in the garden was to work it and protect it. What do you mean by that? This man named Gerhard van Rad, he says this verse shows us this. He says that work is man's sober destiny, even in our perfected state. In other words, there was work to be done in paradise. Here's the great news. Some people, I've heard people say this before, like, I don't even know if I want to go to heaven. I'll be bored. There's nothing to do. Let's rewind that, because it says that God is going to create a new heaven and new earth, and we're going to get to be there, and it's going to be fulfilling, and we're going to worship. But remember, worship isn't just singing, right? Worship is us living a life that looks a lot like the garden. You're going to have something to do. You will. There was work in paradise. The garden is not just some vacation spot where the angels are come and you're sitting on a beach and the angels bring you martinis. Like that's not, or margaritas. That's more of a beach thing, right? Like that's not exactly what was going on in the Garden of Eden. The garden was luxurious and abundant, and humans had a role. Work it. That's what we did. We work. So if working is part of our purpose, why is resting such an important part of our growing and flourishing? And so I want us to skip ahead a little bit in Genesis. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. We're going to go to chapter 3, verse 16. And this is after Adam and Eve have eaten the forbidden fruit. And so some of you've seen the pictures of Adam and Eve, and they've still got the fruit dripping off of them, and they're trying to cover their private parts with the leaves and all this stuff, and they're in shame. Right? They're in shame because now they've eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is not a good time. They had all of this freedom. They had all of this great work to do. They had all of this enjoyment, and they were just told, hey, this one thing, just don't do this. And they did it. And so God then tells both of them that there will be consequences. And in verse 16, it starts and it says, to the woman, he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Moms, you've experienced that? Yeah, that's not the way it was intended. It's not that you wouldn't enjoy, it's not that you wouldn't give birth, it's that the pain would not be multiplied, as what this verse actually says. It was painful for you to give birth to children. And then it says this, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. In other words, this is the way it's going to be. Is you're going to want to take control over everything. You're going to take control of life and your household and everything else. And that's going to be the negative thing, that you're going to want to kind of lord things over him. And here's the problem, is he's going to lord it right back over you. And he's going to kind of treat you like you should be treated. And he's not going to be a servant. No. He's going to try to be a master. That's the kind of relationship that you guys are going to have now. Now, here's the thing. This is not prescriptive. This is not God saying, well, this is good. This is how it should be. No, this is a consequence of sin. This is a consequence of the fall, that our relationships are going to be broken. Do you feel that? Do you feel that in your daily life, that it's just a grind? Getting through is just a grind. Trying to have a relationship with somebody that you've committed your entire life to, it's a grind. It's hard. Now here's the hard thing is, Christ followers, we live in a now and yet not yet kingdom. We're still living in this world that is still broken, and yet there's parts of it that have already started to be restored. Our soul can be restored, and yet we're still living in the midst of brokenness and lostness. And so we kind of have to, what do we do in this messy in between? Because we know in the future when we're living in heaven for eternity that this stuff is going to be taken care of. But what does that mean for now? See, we live with joy because we have hope, but it's still hard. And if we continue to read in verse 17, to Adam he said, because you just listened to your wife instead of listening to what I had to say, and you ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. And you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground. And since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Adam chose his way over God's flourishing. And his work model completely shifted. See, it wasn't that he wouldn't work before. It's that when he would work, it would just be like something that just comes natural, and it would bear much fruit. And now it's Man, I'm working, and now I've got this barren tree. This is not the way it was designed to be, and yet that's the way life is now going to be for us. Adam's going to work the ground, but instead of working in an abundant garden fed by 4 rivers and filled with fruit trees, he's going to pull weeds, pluck thorns, and struggle with the soil. See, separated from God, humanity's work is a lot more toil. It's a lot more demanding. It's sweaty, hard work, more dirt and fewer plants. An inbox that never gets to zero. A bank account with a lot of zeros, not a lot of commas. The work no longer enjoys the same abundance as back in Eden. And while we don't starve, it takes a lot more to stay full. See, humans had meaningful work in the garden and real rest. See, remember, work is not punishment. So if you're one of those in here and you're just like, I tell everybody they shouldn't work hard, that's not what it's about. It's not about living a lazy life. It's not about not doing anything. Work is a good thing. Having a good work ethic is a great thing. That's something amazing that we can pass on to the next generation. But that's not the end all be all. There still needs to be rest. Work and rest are at the core of creation. And so whether you homeschool your kids, you weld metal, handle multi-million-dollar contracts, treat wounds, plumb drains, or make turkey sandwiches, your work's not a curse. Your work is not a curse. Work is good, but busyness and overwork with too little rest will leave you like the fruit on the screen. Just show it again, just to get that nasty picture in our mind. That's not how we want to live. But if we continue to live like we've been living, that's the way our lives will look. So how can we get back to a healthier balance of work and rest? How can we bring back peace to our lives? What if it's as simple as a word that we don't really say very often? What's as simple as Sabbath? What if it's as simple as Sabbath? What is Sabbath to you? What is Sabbath for you? Most Christians, I think, don't even know what to make of it. They don't have a clue. So what kind of comes to your mind when you think Sabbath? Some of you are like, I don't know. It's like some people think it's Saturday. Some people think it's Sunday. I'm not really going to get into the politics of that. Whatever. Like that's kind of about maybe all you think of it. Does that mean go to church on Sunday? Is that what Sabbath means? And grab lunch afterwards at so-and-so restaurant? Can't be Chick-fil-A. Closed on Sunday. Sunday's Sabbath, right? Could be. But Sabbath is more than a day. See, the connection of Sunday and Sabbath is a byproduct of kind of an abandoned era in the U.S. See, as recently as the 1900s, the U.S. enforced what was called blue laws that restricted Sunday business. You couldn't buy, you couldn't sell, you couldn't do certain things on Sunday at all. After World War II, more money began to fill every household thanks to rapid economic growth, and the 5-day work week, television, and advertising stuff all happened. And so then what happens? We need more days to buy more things because we got so much. So then other people have to work on those days, and so that slowly starts to change a little bit. And then by the 60s, the Sabbath is really kind of an old religious relic that nobody even paid attention to anymore. And the Supreme Court cases began overruling the laws protecting the government-backed day of rest. And so now in the 21st century, most of us live in a world without a single day of rest from consuming and producing. Right? That's, if we're to be honest. Most of us don't have one day. Every single day, every hour, every minute, every moment, we have to consume or produce. So after about 60 years or so running that experiment, how's it going? How's that working for you? Not working great for me. It's going so badly that now even non-Christian thinkers argue that a Sabbath A complete day of rest from work, production, and consumption is the healthiest way to live. Bridget Schultz says, do you know that even thinking about work does something to your body? Your body thinks you are working. Some of you are like, I don't know why I'm sick all the time. I don't know why I have all this pain all the time. I don't know why I feel so tired all the time. I don't know why I feel so stressed all the time. Your body feels it. Your body is feeling all of your calendar, all of that stress, all of it. You go, well, but JD, didn't Jesus hate the Sabbath? Didn't he say some stuff about that? Didn't he wipe that whole thing out? No. That's a myth. Let's myth bust for just a second. Let's clear up some biblical myths here. The first one is this. There's some myths about kind of who the bad guys are in the Bible. And a lot of people will go, oh, it's the Pharisees. They're the bad guys in the Bible. Well, there's some bad guys all in all kinds of groups. So I wouldn't say the Pharisees are necessarily the bad guys in the Bible. They're not the villains. Sure, some are hypocrites, but some are pretty solid. Luke, a follower of Jesus, calls Gamaliel a wise voice of moderation. John, one of Jesus' closest friends, tells of a Pharisee named Nicodemus who goes and learns from Jesus and then later defends him. When Jesus was alive, there's many groups of different Jewish people. The Sadducees were priests and scribes who didn't believe in the resurrection. The Essenes, they were monks. The Zealots and Sicarii were political activists and freedom fighters, and the Herodians were politicians. But the Pharisees, they were the ones, they believed in a resurrection. They believed in the resurrection of the dead, the Spirit of God, and the importance of God's law, the Torah. They really, really cared about God's law. See, they had the right intention to obey God, but they lost the point. So they're not villains. They just lost the plot. They were so afraid of breaking God's laws, specifically one of them is command to rest, that they actually added rules. Well, no drinking water outside of your camp. You on that day, you can't walk more than 0.27 miles. You can't do that. You can't wear perfume on that. And by the way, you cannot open a sealed vessel because that's work. I mean, maybe. Some of those pickle jars are hard to open every now and then. I can't get them open either. And so Jesus doesn't take issue with the Sabbath. He takes issue with religious leaders misunderstanding the purpose of the Sabbath. He opposes their restrictive legalism and where they enforce rest instead of receiving rest. See, they were trying to force things to happen instead of receiving God's blessing of what he was already trying to offer them. See, today we struggle with the opposite. We're not Sabbathaholics looking for ways to turn Sabbath into a game of what's work and what's not. Today we forget about the Sabbath altogether. And we didn't get that from Jesus. Look at what Jesus does on the Sabbath and then what he says about Sabbathing. He says this in Luke 4:16, he went to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. They went to Capernaum, and this is Mark chapter 1. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. See, Jesus teaches on the Sabbath. He's teaching on the Sabbath. He goes to synagogue consistently on the Sabbath. And most of his healing miracles that Jesus performs also happen on the Sabbath. Matthew chapter 12, Mark chapter 1, John chapter 5, John chapter 7. And then Jesus explains his view to the Pharisees, the ones that are going, you shouldn't be doing this. He explains it to them. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, 28, he says, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is for healing. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but the Sabbath is not another rule to obey. It's meant to be healing for your body, for your soul. It's meant to be a place of rest and reset. Jesus didn't abandon the Sabbath. He lovingly, sometimes love speaks directly, redirects the Pharisees to the correct view. They lost their way, adding man-made rules, and started growing the weeds of legalism. See, the Sabbath is a restorative blessing, not a religious duty. It's designed by God to serve humans. And just as God rested, we must rest. The Sabbath is a gift. And yet, in the relentless pursuit of life that we have, we forget about it. So how can we discover and embrace the Sabbath personally? Like we said, the Sabbath isn't this certain day. It's this lifestyle now, and it's for us. It's not meant to be a religious rule that holds us down. It's meant to be something that brings healing to our life. And so I want to give you a few ways that we can kind of use this Sabbath, that we can get back to the Sabbath so that we can live in a place of rest. And so I want you to write them down so that you can go back home and think through these this afternoon and go, how can I put this into effect in my life? And the first one is this: press pause on productivity. Some of you, that was like a curse. Press pause on productivity. The word Sabbath, it's simple. It means cease, desist. It's a break from producing and being busy. The pastor, Dallas Willard, says that hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Most of the time, the thing that's being ruthlessly eliminated is our time with Jesus, the one that can bring peace. Your worth is not defined by your latest accomplishments, your calendar appointments, or the length of your to-do list. But here's the hard part: is Sabbath requires us to surrender. See, if we only stop when we finish all our work, we'll never stop, because our work is never completely done. Maybe we can take a hint from King David, who's talking about God in Psalm 46:10, and he says that we need to be still. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. See, Sabbath is a radical choice in our world, but it's needed. It's an intentional decision to step out of the relentless current of doing and into the calm waters of being. And that's hard. That's really hard. And depending on how you were raised, man, that's really hard. Because you feel like if you're not accomplishing something, then you're wasting. But it's not the model that our God gave us. The model he gave us the model that we would rest. And if this great God could rest, then why can we not? See, pause on producing reminds us that our value in God's eyes is not about tasks that we complete, but the lives that we lead and the love that we share. The second thing, write down, is to rest and resist. Rest and resist. Rest is physical. Take a break from physical labor. Give your mind a minute. Just give your body, arms, legs, and back a break. And in the rhythm of God's creation, it's not an afterthought, it's a crowning act. Matthew 11:28 says this: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Walter Brueggemann says, when we Sabbath, we rebel and resist overwork. When we resist the lie that our worth is measured by efficiency, This does not mean we set aside ambitions for a holy lethargy and instead recalibrates our ambition to stop it from overtaking our lives. God's attention is not predicated on your performance. It's not. The third thing is this: choose worship and not worry. Choose worship, not worry. What will happen when we redirect our focus from the cycle of worry to worship? When we worship, we declare God is in control, and we place our worry in his capable hands. See, trusting God cuts loose from the weeds of worry. This is exactly the perspective shift. If we're going to try to accomplish any kind of Sabbath in our life, if we're going to have any kind of rest in our life, this is what we ultimately have to understand, is that God is capable of doing so much more in our rest and through our rest than we are on our own. See, a lot of times churches, we talk about tithe all the time. Well, it's 10% and give 10%, and that's blah, 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 and this is very important. And I'm not knocking that. I'm not knocking giving. Giving is important. But this is what I want to do. We put a major focus on giving and the 10% and that. 10%, that's 10 out of 100, right? That's 1 out of 10. God asks us more to rest, to spend more resting than he does giving. That's 1 out of 7 for you mathematicians out there. 1 out of 7 versus 1 out of 10. It is more important, like more percentage-wise, it's out there, of rest. Because when we choose to rest, not when we choose to be lazy, but when we choose to rest, we are going, God, I've done all I can, and yet I realize that I'm still not in control. You are. And so I'm going to do everything that I can, and the rest I'm going to put in your hands. And this is what I want to tell, especially to parents, and I'm preaching to myself here. It's so hard. As parents, you can do everything right, and your kids still end up messed up. You can do all of the right things, put them in the right sports, get them the right education, make them read the right verses. You can do all of the right things. But if you model a life that puts nothing in the control of God, then they see no need for God in their own. But when they start to see that, you know what, you're doing the best parenting you can, you're doing the very best that you can, and the rest you're going, hey, we're just going to spend time with Jesus. We're going to spend time with each other today. That speaks volumes to the importance of Jesus in their life. And we can do that with every single aspect of our life. We need to rest.